Hi, boys and girls, and everyone that's in between. I'm 99 Paperman, and this is a review of how I would improve the story of The Last of Us Part 2. Fair warning, if you haven't already played the game or seen the story, then this will contain spoilers, and I suggest clicking off this video right now. I really enjoyed playing The Last of Us Part 2. I think overall it was a thrilling tale carrying an intense narrative of how grief, vengeance, and blind rage can unravel the moral threads that compose an individual. With the beautifully crafted environments, the weapon crafting mechanics, the unique NPC interactions, and the combat system, I feel that it is difficult to call it a bad game. Through a game design perspective, it is a AAA title deserving of popularity and acclaim. However, there are fans within the community that are outraged by the game. After going through these poor reviews, I noticed that most of the complaints involve the story, which makes sense through a game design perspective since the consumer typically focuses on the aesthetics of a gaming product. The story of AAA games are a large part of that aesthetic. I would put it almost at the same level as a movie. So, when a story does not leave the player feeling satisfied, it can ruin the aesthetic and experience for them, making them feel it was a bad game regardless of its other elements. In this critique, I'm going to review what story elements I feel caused the most dissatisfaction and offer a solution that could have improved the experience for the audience without drastically changing the game and its assets. A large part of disappointment for anyone can be built on expectations and preconceived ideas. I believe that most fans playing the game expected to have an extension of the original narrative that involved the duo of Joel and Ellie. They wanted to see them as a team come together and overcome another overwhelming force of bad guys, such as the Fireflies, or a rival group wishing to tear down their new way of life living in Jackson. No one was prepared for the introduction in the game where Joel is immediately killed in front of us in the most graphic way possible. This on its own did not ruin the story, but it did strike a nerve in the fanbase. The first half of the game delivered a narrative of seeking revenge. The player, feeling outraged as Ellie, was able to feel the protagonist's thirst for justice through bloodshed. It made them feel justified attacking rival groups, even when they cried out in pain as we killed their friends, or even their dogs. Ellie had a great dynamic with her friends Dina and Jesse. The chemistry between the three of them alone was enough to keep me as the audience engaged to see how they were going to survive for the rest of the game. I think the writers wasted a lot of potential in creating more moments between the characters that really emphasized their bonds. In a way, they could have made an entire story just focusing on the three of them. Nina, being Ellie's love interest and pregnant with Jesse's child, could have been a very intense and beautiful love triangle. It could have had its own inner conflict that made them come together as a family towards the end. Instead, we had Dina's pregnancy reduce her role in the game's missions past the first stages, and Jesse having a few combat appearances, but not nearly enough exploration into his relationship with Ellie. I feel like the violence and having Ellie run off chasing Joel's killers alone multiple times disconnected the audience from getting to appreciate the writing for these characters. So, one thing I would improve in the plot development would be more interactions that show the moral standings with these characters, such as when Jesse showed great shame for Ellie refusing to help save Joel's brother Tommy to pursue Joel's main killer, Abby. This emphasized how much hatred Ellie contained in her heart, while also building Jesse's character and morality. The game desperately needed more scenes like this. Now, the game has two characters that we switch between. Ellie, the original female protagonist, and Abby as the main antagonist. During the boiling point where Abby faces off with Ellie for killing all of her friends, the player is flashed back to Abby's life before the events occurred. This leaves the player hanging to see what the conclusion is, and gives them an entire new set of mechanics and missions to play through. I feel that this is very clever to make the player play both sides of the conflict. However, it was a huge risk from a writing standpoint. The player already hates the antagonist and is resistant to having empathy for them. That leaves a lot of burden on the writer to create a character that produces the same amount of empathy as the protagonist can. Although I would argue that Abby was not the best written character for this role, I do believe she had a good storyline. Her rough exterior and lack of emotional vulnerability, however, made it very hard to see her as a victim in the same way Ellie was. The writers were trying to tie in to the theme of a cycle of hatred destroying everyone and learning how to see through another person's perspective. And I feel like because we were unable to see how much Abby's father meant to her and the experiences they went through in the same way as playing an entire game with Ellie and Joel, they needed more scenes that emphasized Abby's trauma and pain, instead of just showing the rough exterior that she had to grow into to deal with the pain of losing her father and way of life as a result of Joel's actions. It would have been really eye-opening to see how relatable her pain and rage was to Ellie's. How she could not feel like she could just move on. Instead of, we got this character who learned how to suppress these emotions and started out as a cold character that the audience found easy to hate. Another thing I would change about the story is adding more vulnerability to Abby in her interaction with her friends and even Ellie. She does not talk about her emotions anywhere near the level that we, the audience, need to understand. However, her redemption arc of learning how to show empathy to an enemy group member is beautiful, and does make her journey completely the opposite of Ellie's. Where Ellie's journey is focused on sacrificing her humanity to get revenge for Joel at all cost, Abby's journey involves finding her humanity through saving others at all cost. That in itself is not horrible plot writing. I believe that the center of The Last of Us 2's unsatisfying story aesthetics comes from how they handle the climax in the theater. During the most critical part of the story, the player is forced to play as Abby, having a one-on-one standoff against Ellie. This, regardless of how much character development was done with Abby, is horrible for the fans. The player is left feeling like they are abandoning the main character they love when they need them the most. Having Ellie as a final boss may emphasize how Ellie is no longer this black and white moral individual in the story, but it was so unnecessary. The story could have had the player take on Abby as a final boss and still maintain Ellie's role as an antagonist blinded by rage and revenge. This way, the audience do not feel isolated from the main character's most important moment of her life. Also, in the conflict, Abby again came out on top and decided to show her mercy for the second time, which led not only the audience feeling unsatisfied with the outcome, but also Ellie. Instead of having the plot naturally end after its main climax resolves, showing growth in Ellie's character being able to show forgiveness and move on, Ellie is stuck with all these unresolved emotions that make her sacrifice her paradise with Dina to once again get revenge on Abby. This was the lowest point of the game again. To see the main character lose so much, and to have her throw what she has away again to learn a lesson that could have been learned much sooner. In your typical hero's journey, a hero experiences conflict that may lead them to an abyss, which is their lowest point. You can see multiple times Ellie reaching close to this abyss as she does actions that conflict with her humanity, such as torturing Nora for a location or stabbing a pregnant woman in her lust for revenge. Usually when reaching this abyss, the main character reaches a point of transformation that allows them to come out of this abyss and redeem themselves. Abby very much gets to have this transformation in her side of the story. Ellie, on the other hand, is kept from this almost the entire story. By having Abby come out on top in the standoff with Ellie at the theater, we are denied Ellie having the autonomous decision to be able to let this conflict go between them in an appropriate time. Abby began the story with having complete control over the conflict, forcing Ellie to watch as she killed Joel. It would have been more poetic and developed a strong sense of irony by putting Ellie in a position where she can enact the same kind of violence that Abby enacted on Joel. Having her in a position where she can just have her revenge staring Abby in the eyes, but instead, with either having dialogue with Abby or by looking at her reflection, come to the conclusion that Abby and her are two sides of the same coin, trapped in a cycle of hatred that does nothing but destroy the things they both love. This was the ultimate moment of redemption that could have satisfied and redeemed both the characters. Instead, we are left with an ending of a PTSD frustrated Ellie, attempting to live her life on a farm with Dina, but unable to move on, thus throwing away her life on the farm, which is her paradise, to force another climactic moment between her and Abby, where she finally comes to the realization of the futility of their conflict at the price of everything good she has left. Her relationship with Dina, her farm life, being a part of baby JJ's life, and even her fingers that allowed her to play the guitar that Joel gave her and taught her how to play. This leaves us watching our hero going through a transformation, but absolutely no atonement or positive adjustments for her life. This would leave any fan on a surface level dissatisfied, as it forces us to leave Ellie's story feeling nothing but pain and regret. Usually when a story is left feeling unresolved in such a way, the audience is at least left with the promise of a sequel that will allow the character to atone or make it out of their new abyss. Instead, it feels like we watched our protagonists go from one abyss, transform, and then get lost in another abyss of unresolved loneliness. And I would argue that no fan of a character wants to see their story end as such a painful tragedy with no positive outcome. So in conclusion, I would improve the story of The Last of Us Part 2 in the following ways. Give stronger character development for side characters. Give more emotional scenes for Abby. And rewrite the climactic conflict at the movie theater to be the final fight between Abby and Ellie, where Ellie comes out on top and shows mercy to Abby, then moves on with her life with Dina. That would have changed the direction of the game's story and improved the aesthetic for players without drastically changing the gameplay overall. Thank you for listening to this broadcast. I'm 99 Paperman, and I like making video game content. Let me know in the comments section how you feel. Did you like the game? Did you not like the game? Did you like the ideas I imposed? Or do you disagree with them? I'd love to know your opinion. So make sure to comment below, like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and hit the dislike button if you feel like it, and I'll go cry in a corner about it later. Thanks. This is 99 Paperman, signing out.